Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. If you're new to the channel, my name is Robert and I like to do woodworking projects with resin. I decided to break up this video into two parts because one video was just too long. So in this two-part series, I'm going to show you how to take this beautiful piece of maple and turn it into this stunning table. So stick around because this build starts right now. So to get this build started, first thing I do is build a frame using 1x3 wood and lay out what I think I want the table to look like. And once I got that, I start building the base. Now here I'm using some particle wood and some 2x4s that I cut. So each piece of those particle boards are 2 feet wide and they were 8 feet long. And I took a bunch of 2x4s, cut them in half, and they fit perfectly underneath and just screwed them in so that this way the base was solid. Once I got all that done, I move ahead and start putting on tuck tape on the bottom. And the whole point of this is because, of course, tuck tape doesn't stick to resin. So once I have the whole thing covered in tuck tape, I'm ready to start removing all the bark. Now, when you remove the bark, make sure you get all of it. Take your time, and you want to make sure you get everything, because if there's any bark left over, that could cause a problem for your epoxy to stick to the actual wood. Once all the bark is gone, I'm going to take the actual piece of maple, place it on the form I built, and I'll draw it out so that I know exactly where I want the wood to actually sit. You can see that right there. Then I'll raise it up and I'll put 2 rows of silicone caulking there. And the reason why is because I want to leave a live edge on one side, so I don't want any resin going beyond that point right there. So there I am with my sun, and once we got it all laid out, we then start putting all the caulking all around. Once we have a good bead of caulking where the actual form is going to sit, we'll actually put the form down and we'll just be very gentle to squeeze it, but not too much. You want to leave that silicone, that caulking underneath so it seals, so that when you pour the resin, it doesn't leak out everywhere. So as you can see, we're using those clamps. We're not clamping them down too hard, just a little bit, just so we get squeeze out. And then we'll take our finger and we'll spread out the caulking all around it and make sure that there are no areas that have no caulking inside and outside of the form. Next thing we have to do is we have to clamp down the wood, because no matter how much that wood weighs, whether it's 100, 200 pounds, it's going to float once you pour the resin in. So everything has to be clamped down to ensure it doesn't float. At this point here, what I'm doing is I'm measuring the gap between the 2 pieces of wood. That's where the resin will be, and I do it about every 2 to 3 inches, and this way I get an average width. So I'll add them all together and then divide it by the actual amount of measurements I took. Once I did that, I realized that is a lot of resin. So I added that additional piece of wood off to the side. So next, I'm going to start mixing a little bit of resin. And as you can see by the timer on the floor, take your time. As you can see, I got that piece of wood. I'm scraping the sides of it, and I'm scraping the bottom, and I will definitely mix for a good 5 minutes. Then I'll add my pigment in it, and then I'll mix for another 5 minutes more. You don't have to be in a rush. You got plenty of time. This resin won't start activating for a good 40 minutes. So mix it up. I usually let it sit about 10-15 minutes so bubbles come to the top, and then I'll start to pour. So here I am on the ladder going up, and there's the pour. So I am pouring half of what I actually need, because what I want to do is I want a blue base and then a clear inch of epoxy on the top of it. When I got the majority of the epoxy out of the bucket, I'll just let it sit there on the side and just let it come out on its own. Every once in a while, maybe scraping the walls a little bit. After that, I'll wait about 20 minutes, a half hour, even 40 minutes, and I'll just take a torch and I'll lightly break the bubbles on the top. Now, I've used this resin so many times that I know that it takes about 6 hours before it really starts to thicken. So at about 6 hours, I'll come downstairs and I'll give it a swirl, and I know it's not going to stay. But I'll just keep going, just to monitor it to make sure that it's not getting too thick, and this way I won't be able to actually do a swirl or a pattern into it. Now I gotta admit, I poured this at 8 o'clock in the morning, and when I finally did the swirl that I knew that it was going to hold, it was actually 2 o'clock in the morning. So it was almost, 18 hours before it started to thicken enough. But after you do a swirl, of course, you're going to put some air into the epoxy. So again, you got to take your torch and just pass over it lightly just to break any of the bubbles. Now, once I've done that final swirl, I'll make sure that I don't touch this resin for a week to let it fully harden before I do anything. And take a look at that pattern. What do you think of it? My customer actually loved it. So once it's fully cured, I then start taking some sandpaper, and that's 120 grit, and I just start scuffing the top of the actual resin. And the reason why you want to do this is because the clear resin will bond better to the blue resin if it has something to grip onto. So I just take a little block with some 120 sandpaper and just lightly go ahead and scuff it all. And then after that, do a nice cleanup job and start to clean it fully with isopropyl alcohol. And the reason why you want to use isopropyl alcohol is because you want to ensure that in case you had oils on your hand or something like that, it's removed from the epoxy. And if it doesn't, if it remains there, what could happen is your clear layer of epoxy may not bond to the actual blue layer. So it is really important. There I go. There I'm showing it to you. It's really important not to miss this step. Clean it good and make sure that it is ready for your clear layer. Now, as for the clear layer, even though I am not mixing any colors into it, of course, I still take my time, mix for a good 10 minutes, and ensure that the resin is completely mixed, because it's a two-part. It's a hardener and the resin itself. Now, I just want to caution you on one thing. If you look at me in this image, you can see I have my respirator on. Please always wear a respirator. Now, some people say you only have to wear it when you're sanding resin or wood or stuff like that. I basically use it all the time. Whenever I'm mixing or dealing with resin or anything, it's on all the time. Now, I've now poured the resin here, and to be honest, it's winter time here, and I'm in Toronto, so it's cold out, and I left the window open to my shop for almost 3 days to allow this to ensure that no heat built up in the actual resin in the clear layer. Because if you do get heat in the clear layer, it'll cause bubbles, those micro bubbles. So after a week of just letting it sit there, I am now removing everything. Now, if you notice, I'm actually kind of careful with the forms because I already have an order for my next table, and it's almost the exact same size as this, so I can reuse all this wood and save myself a little money. But take your time, take it apart, and you could see, look, I had no leaks because we did it properly. We took our time with the silicone, and it came out perfect. Now you may be thinking, hey, you know what? I'm going to give this a shot. And I encourage you, definitely give it a shot. It's fun. You can definitely fix any mistakes you made. It's just wood. You could fill it with some resin and no one will even know you made a mistake. But I'll tell you this, be prepared to put in massive amounts of hours. I'll guarantee you that this build took me over 50 hours in total from start to finish. Now here I am popping the board from the actual form, and it's quite hard to do because that table at that point right there weighed around 300 pounds, and so I always end up doing that stuff by myself. And so I've now gone ahead and filled all the little cracks and all the knots where the bark was with some blue resin, and then top it off with some clear so it matches everywhere. Now, I always use this place, Anglewood Furniture. They're located in Toronto. Great guys. Alex is so nice to me every time I'm in there. And I bring him my bigger pieces. He planes them for me. It cost me about $95, but I don't have to try to flatten that slab of wood with a 5-inch palm sander. So I'm going to end part 1 here, and don't forget to come back for part 2, where I put in the C-channels, I install the legs, and then sand it and buff it down to that beautiful finish. So, hope to see you in the next video.